in general, it just doesn't work to just tell people they're wrong. And they have to kind of discover for themselves what they're wrong about.
You're listening to Unchecked, the podcast about the architecture of disinformation with Dan Brown and Rachel Price.
What are you doing for Thanksgiving?
Oh, Thanksgiving. Or is it Thanksgiving?
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving. It's Thanksgiving.
Now I don't know how I say it. What are you doing for the turkey holiday?
I'm not cooking turkey because I don't care for it, but we're hosting about 20 people.
No shit.
Yeah. So
That's a lot of people.
Well, it didn't start off as that many people, but I forgot how many children everyone has. So then it became that many people. Because I guess the kids are invited. We like them.
So you're not serving turkey?
No, we are going to serve some traditional Lebanese food, some kibbeh, and some other things, which is lamb and beef.
Okay.
I mean, my friends know this by now. I'm happy to host. I will not cook a large bird because I just don't care. So they know that if they are interested in consuming a large bird on that day, they have to bring it.
BYOB.
BYO burb.
That's good. I like it.
Yeah. How about you?
We're here. My son is coming back from college today, in fact, which I'm very excited about.
Wow.
Yeah, we have older set who comes for Thanksgiving.
So food that can be gummed.
There's a lot of shouting, but not angry shouting. It's just that nobody can hear each other. Yeah. Did we decide I'm doing historic?
You're historic because I did not actually do my homework correctly.
I've been listening to a book called Working by Robert Caro. He's known primarily for two biographies, one of Lyndon B. Johnson and one of a man named Robert Moses, a book called The Power Broker.
It sounds long.
It is very long. Robert Moses was an urban planner in the mid-20th century in New York City. Much of the topology and contours of New York City are because of Robert Moses. Robert Moses was, I think I can say, a kind of a horrible person because he whole hog moved entire neighborhoods, entire blocks of apartments just to make room for the highways and thoroughfares in New York City.
So did he part the water for other things to get through?
He did not part the waters.
That was someone else.
He built bridges, a lot of bridges in New York because of Robert Moses. Anyway, this book by Robert Caro is fantastic, and a number of people recommended it to me because it talks about Caro's writing process. One of the stories that he tells in this book is, this was like in the 60s, he was doing research to figure out why Robert Moses had built a highway that went out Long Island, why it didn't go straight, why it had this enormous curve in it. And he was puzzled by this because Robert Moses, in the interview that he had done with him, had said, I built everything exactly the way I wanted to build it. And Caro couldn't reconcile this enormous curve in this highway. So he did some digging and he found, surprise, surprise, some corruption. It turns out that the highway would have been disruptive to what they call the Gold Coast, which is kind of the northern edge of Long Island that goes up against the Long Island Sound. And that's where a lot of the robber barons had built their mansions and their golf courses and things like that. $10,000 changed hands, and Robert Moses said, okay, I'll put a big old curve in the middle of this.
Turns out my idea was to curve this the whole time.
Right, that's what I want to do. But that story got buried. This is not a story about misinformation, but because I'm listening for that so much these days, it felt like a story about misinformation.
Yeah.
And part of it was Robert Moses had cultivated this brand, essentially, of himself, of him being kind of ruthless and uncompromising. And it turned out, once we dug below that brand, there was the truth. And the truth was he had a price, just like everyone else. And that price was, in this case, $10,000. So for me, that was sort of the interesting part of this desire not only to have this view of himself as completely uncompromising, but the fact that he was able to bury this story. And it took a very careful researcher like Robert Caro to kind of uncover it.
I mean, part of framing is suppression of information that doesn't fit in that frame.
Exactly.
My story is very recent, actually. I'm kind of passing forward some reporting of top misinformation circulations in the EU in the month of October. Very specific. But I found the European Digital Media Observatory, EDMO, is this project that supports the independent community working to combat disinformation. And so every month they do like a fact-checking roundup to report on what's circulating, where things are coming from, and the kinds of patterns they're seeing around the EU. So October's report headline is this, in all capitals. AI-generated disinformation hits a new record in October as information integrity crumbles.
Wow.
Like, cue my surprised face, right?
Right.
So EDMO maintains a fact-checking network, and each month that network publishes a pretty large set of fact-checking articles that EDMO analyzes for patterns in disinformation. And so based on the reports this month, they list out the 4 false stories with the widest circulation in the EU. I'm going to read them to you. The first is AI-generated content of Hurricane Melissa and the related destruction there. The second is an AI-generated image of Zelensky wearing platform shoes. Third is AI-generated videos of the theft at the Louvre. And fourth is a story about a UK teenager arrested for waving a UK flag. When you zoom out and look at this stuff, you can kind of scoff at how obviously ridiculous this stuff is. But like 2 of them, like the Hurricane Melissa and the theft at the Louvre, breaking news where there's a vacuum of information.
Right.
And not only is disinformation filling it, but like AI generated disinformation can fill it real quick.
Was the finding of this organization that people not just circulated it, but there was evidence that people believed what they were seeing as well? Because it's possible they were circulating it because they were like, look how screwed up this is.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. One more thing from this report that I thought that really captured my attention is one misinformation story that EDMO has marked as, quote, significant at the national level, is the story floating around the country of Cyprus claiming that the 15-minute city model, which, are you familiar with the 15-minute city?
I am not.
So this is a model of walkable and bikeable cities with decentralized networks of workspaces and shopping. You know, like you should be able to like live your life within 15 minutes of your home. Anyway, the disinformation story that is significant in Cyprus right now is that the 15-minute city model is actually a government scheme for total population control.
That's amazing.
That was a new one for me. And then I actually did a little digging. And apparently there's a lot of controversy around this 15-minute city idea, which I didn't dig into for this episode. I might bring it back to dig into later because I had not come across that theme of misinformation before, the 15-minute city one.
I'd be really interested if this rises above the level of conspiracy theory. There's something to be said for, you know, being able to do everything within 15 minutes of your home. If I'm honest, my childhood growing up in Manhattan, that was pretty much true. I could walk to school in 15 minutes. That was the longest thing I ever needed to do. But I can't imagine sort of like what's the nefarious. I can understand people imagining it's nefarious.
I can imagine if people think it's about suppression that it could feel nefarious. But let's put a pin in this. I have a lot of questions about that one.
We're about to talk to Amelia Finaret, a nutritionist. I'm really excited to talk to her.
Yeah, this is a great one. Today we get to talk to Amelia Finaret, who is an associate professor of global health and economics at Allegheny College in Meadville, Pennsylvania. She's also a clinical dietitian at a local hospital, seeing patients with diabetes, eating disorders, growth problems, cardiovascular disease, and obesity. She's the author with Will Masters of the textbook Food Economics, Agriculture, Nutrition, and Health. And her research focuses on data quality for large-scale nutrition surveys, the health effects of foods, and the economics of malnutrition. Amelia, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Obviously, we invited you here with a lens around your work and misinformation and seeing how those things intersect and kind of your perspective on that. So just give us a little bit of background here. How does misinformation kind of intersect with your work?
So the main way that misinformation about nutrition intersects with my work is through having my patients tell me things that I can tell are from somewhere else. The things that they tell me really vary a lot. Diet trends definitely come and go. And there's been diet trends forever. It's not a new thing, right? And there's also been misinformation about food and diets and health for a long time as well. But what I see is mainly three main categories of things that I hear from patients. Some of the misinformation I hear is, not super problematic in terms of health problems that it might cause if you were to employ this advice. Slightly wrong, but not really that harmful to people. Another category is outright harmful stuff, like if you do this, you could hurt yourself in some way. And then another category is misinterpretations of the scientific literature and also bad science too that's out there. And there's a lot of both of those things. For some examples about the first category of, kind of benign misinformation about nutrition are things like coconut water being more hydrating than water, right? Yes, coconut water has electrolytes, so if you are deficient in some electrolytes, then coconut water will help you hydrate faster than just drinking plain water. But if you just eat food and drink water, you also get electrolytes from your food, and then you can drink the water, and then you don't actually need to buy the coconut water, and you'd be perfectly hydrated. So it's not like a harmful lie, but it's one of those pieces of misinformation that's kind of getting us to buy things, which is going to be for sure a theme. Things like juice counts as a fruit serving. That's not going to be harmful to people, but it is making them think about fruit in a way that is not exactly correct, because when you take it out of its matrix with all the fiber, then the nutrient properties really do change. Or things like honey being healthier than sugar. They're the same. They're just the same. Honey is not healthier than sugar. Maybe I wish that it was, but it's not. So those are kind of our benign things. The things that are more dangerous are dietary patterns that restrict food groups. So for example, the carnivore diet being very high in meat and animal-sourced foods and very low in plant-based foods. It's being touted as something that can prevent disease and improve longevity and reduce obesity, but it really does come with a lot of harms. Not enough fiber intake, not enough vitamin and mineral intake. Other things are kind of even worse, like that you should take mega doses of vitamin A to prevent the measles. And this is a really tricky piece of misinformation because it's absolutely true that in contexts where children are deficient in vitamin A, they need vitamin A to prevent them dying from the measles. And there are programs for vitamin A supplementation with megadoses twice a year, every 6 months, that provide that vitamin A. And then those kids have reduced risk of dying from the measles. So that's real. But it's not the case that for people who are not deficient in vitamin A, they need to take megadoses of vitamin A and that will help prevent the measles. That will not happen. And then in terms of statistics and the studies that are out there, there's a lot of nutrition studies. It's sometimes easier to do research on nutrition and dietary intake than on other inputs to your health, because even though it's hard to measure dietary intake, people can still talk about it and they understand what a survey is about. It's low cost, right, to do a survey about what people are eating and kind of figuring out how healthy they are, and then you can do some correlations. But it's really hard to do it well. But then, you see these headlines that's like, oh, well, if you eat this, then you'll be healthier. And that's very tempting. So I think in general, there's so much misinformation about individual foods. And so one category there is about superfoods. So someone will ask me like, oh, well, if I eat kale, then I'll be healthy, right? Yeah, kale is a great food. If you eat it, then it's good for you. It's going to provide you some good nutrition. But that doesn't mean that you're going to cure diseases with it, that your life is going to be changed because of it, that it's somehow some kind of superfood that's going to make you a superhuman, right? Superfoods are just a marketing term that is designed to kind of get us to buy more and different things. Like I said, it's one of the things that is happening with these misinformation trends is that it's getting us to buy stuff.
Oh, interesting. Okay, we're going to come back and talk about that in a minute. One thing I'm hearing seems like there's this pattern of context and nuance, right? Where as you explain the myth, you're like, well, actually, there's these other things happening around this, or that strips the context in which this food exists. Does that feel fair?
Yes, nutrition is one of those things that has to be understood in context, and otherwise it makes no sense. Because if you say an apple is healthy, well, sure, an apple has soluble fiber and it has vitamin C and has calories. That's good too. But you don't know whether an apple is healthy for someone unless you know what their context is. Mm-hmm. And this is the case especially for foods that people might be allergic to, or that if they have medical conditions that make it harder for them to eat things like apples, then that apple would not be healthy for them. So context is the only thing that matters. You could eat any individual food today and it wouldn't have any effect on your health as long as you're not allergic to it, or if it has a foodborne illness, right? As long as that's not the case, any food you eat is healthy anytime. But it's only the long-term trends in context that matter for actual production of your health over time.
Yeah, it feels like staring at a specific tile versus stepping back and looking at the whole mosaic, right? It's two very different things you're looking at. Where do people get their misinformation?
I mean, sometimes I ask people this, but I don't collect data on it. I know that social media is a big culprit here. This is where a lot of people get their news in general, but especially tips about how to be healthy. There's also just journalism that, could benefit from being higher quality when it reports on new scientific studies. And I think scientific journalists are amazing. There's a lot of amazing ones. A lot of them do great work, but there's just not enough of them to report on all this stuff appropriately. So, you end up having an article which is saying like, oh, this study said that if you drink this particular tea, then it can help control your blood sugar, but it's not giving you that other context that might be really helpful because the journalist is too busy or they haven't been trained in scientific journalism or whatever is the case. And people also get nutrition misinformation just at the store.
Ooh, tell me more.
So at the store, there are laws about how food companies can label things, but there's a lot of wiggle room for them to be able to label things in certain ways. So then if we see something like a supplement bottle that says like immune boosting, then we might think like, oh, that's going to help my immune system.
Yeah.
And that is most likely not the case at all, that would help your immune system. So just the labels that we see at the grocery store, at the supplement store, that's a form of misinformation as well.
Oh, that's so interesting. Dan and I have talked a lot about digital information environments. Sometimes that can be very abstract and gets old. Now I'm thinking about packaging and this analog information environment in the grocery store.
Yeah, and I mean, for the grocery store, it's not even just analog anymore, right? Because a lot of people do buy their groceries online and they buy their supplements online. So like Amazon and Walmart.com and all of the online marketplaces that people buy things at, they have images and they have descriptions, and those are digital spaces too. So I think there's a section there that really is important for this particular question.
When something is printed on packaging or included as part of a product description online, it feels authoritative, right? It feels like, well, they printed it. So this is kind of leading me into my next question. These myths and these beliefs are pretty pervasive. Do you get a sense of why folks latch on to these myths?
So I think food and what you choose to eat is a very personal thing. It's something that people want to have a lot of ownership over if they can. And so if you end up kind of criticizing what someone's chosen to eat, it can feel very personal. It's something you're putting into your body, and you know that it contributes to your health status. Even if you don't know how exactly, that doesn't matter. You know that what you eat matters for your health over the long term. So anything that is telling you this is how you can be healthy and this is how you can avoid being unhealthy is going to be very tempting. There's some common kind of trends or patterns in the misinformation, like about how things that are natural are better. And that is like something that people really latch onto. They love the idea that we can prevent disease, treat disease with food. And while that is the case in some ways, you can do a lot of disease prevention by addressing dietary intake and improving dietary quality. You cannot cure diseases with what you eat, and you cannot always prevent disease with what you eat, but it is a nice feeling to be able to kind of think that for yourself. So another reason would be, I think that people feel like they have more agency over what they eat compared to other inputs to their health. Like other inputs to your health are going to include how many hours you sleep, your safety at work, whether you have a dangerous job or not, your educational attainment, whether you have a primary care doctor, whether your income is higher or lower, whether you have a supportive and enriching social life with family and friends and loved ones. All those things are, I think, harder for people to obtain and conceptualize obtaining as inputs to their health compared to food, because like you have to eat every day, right? And
Yeah.
you get food. So it's something that you have more maybe control over compared to those other inputs. It's also kind of easier to experiment with. So like you can experiment with a new dietary pattern and see like if it works for you, whereas you can't really do that as easily with other inputs to health.
Food and nutrition is so fraught, especially I think in American culture. We tend to associate a lot of morality with what you eat and merit and morality with how you look. I say this as from a third party observer. I'm a woman in America. I don't get this sense. I know that if I don't question my perception of this narrative, then I believe that the food I choose is a reflection of how good of a person I am and how much I am worth in this society. We talked in the pre-interview that this isn't just about nutrition. This isn't just about physical health. There's a lot of psychological and social components to this too.
Absolutely. And what you're talking about is diet culture. And diet culture is harmful, like you said, to our psychological health, to our physical health, because what it does is it tells us if you don't eat a certain way, then you have done something wrong and you need to fix it. So then what ends up happening is people go in these cycles, and it might happen over the course of a day or over the course of weeks or months, where they have restriction of what they're eating, and they go and they do certain dietary patterns that are kind of extreme, and maybe it helps them with whatever goal they have, or maybe it doesn't, but then eventually they're going to go back to where they were not restricting, and they're going to then have this swing of shame and then going back and forth, and the going back and forth with weight in particular has been found to be harmful, as opposed to kind of staying at a stable weight, even if that stable weight is higher. So the swinging back and forth that is really driven, I think, by the psychology and by the exposure to diet culture is a huge source of harm.
Yeah.
You said something earlier, Amelia, that I'm still thinking about. And it's just a simple phrase. You said food is personal. I like that framing, but I feel like I grew up with a completely different, let's call it, flavor of that phrase. And that was, you are what you eat. I've been hearing that ever since I can remember. Here's my question, and it's probably more philosophical than anything else. Do you think you are what you eat is the most egregious nutrition misinformation that we have?
It's definitely up there. Really what that phrase is doing is equating food intake, which you have to do to live, with your morality and who you are as a person. But those things really have no reason to be connected at all, scientifically speaking. You don't really want to think about something that you have to do for your health as being determining of who you are as a person.
Right.
But that also drives a lot of how our food system looks and why we have so many different tiers of food system quality and access, where, we've got organic farmers markets on the one hand, and on the other hand, we have like big box stores, and the products are all different. You have like a regular version and a premium version. Like all of this is related to this idea that you are what you eat, so I better eat right. And that usually means spending more money on something that you probably don't need at all.
Or being a citizen of Seattle.
Or that.
I shop here at this grocery store, therefore I am a better person.
Right.
And I belong to a certain socioeconomic class, and therefore I am successful as a person.
Right. It's a really powerful way to signal what you eat, because you do it all the time and you do it socially often, and you might do it in front of your coworkers or your friends. And so it's a big signal, and it's an important part of people's identity. So I don't want to say that it's a useless thing. Of course, it matters to people, and it should matter. But a lot of the things that people end up latching onto are things that actually don't matter. If you were to look at, say, the environment or the health factors or the animal welfare factors, right? Those are all really important things, and there's a lot of science behind all of those categories in terms of what really matters from the food system and also what is not really a problem. And there's a lot of other misinformation about that stuff that I'm sure you guys could get into one day.
Okay, so I think this conversation has really unearthed the fact that you, Amelia, are up against a lot when you're in a conversation with a patient who is bringing you nutrition disinformation. What techniques have you used to try to dislodge some of this misinformation?
I think the first thing to say is that I don't ever want anyone to feel bad, like feel like they've been duped or whatever, because that's never a good feeling. Figuring out what to eat to make us healthy is not like an easy thing necessarily. And a lot of different entities are trying to influence us in one way or another. But there are some red flags to look out for that I can talk to people about. If they feel very fearful about what they've seen, then I think that's a signal to them. So I can bring up to them, okay, well, did you feel very strongly when you saw that? And how did that make you feel? And if they felt that kind of strong disgust or fear about something they saw, then we can talk about sort of where that fear is coming from and why, it might have been manipulated. In general, remembering that food is personal, remembering that people are not going to easily take criticism of their food choices lightly. So asking questions like, okay, so that's interesting that you chose that. Can you tell me more about that? Really validating their concerns about like, okay, well, they want to be able to control their blood sugar. They want to be able to avoid having a heart attack. They want to be able to walk around their house without pain in their legs. Whatever it is, they have goals, right? So validating their concerns that like, yes, this is a serious thing that you're dealing with and we want to address it. So can you tell me more about this thing that you heard? So a little bit of like motivational interviewing, instead of me telling them what to do, instead kind of asking them like, so what do you think you could do to address, say, the salt intake that we talked about? Are there foods that you think are high in salt that you eat that you could reduce your intake of or change the type that you're having? So asking the question instead of telling, I think is really helpful. And also maybe a little bit of Socratic questioning too, but in like a nice way, because I think it can be kind of in a mean way sometimes. So say we have like a claim about nutrition that someone is kind of repeating to me. I would ask them, okay, so what are some questions that you want to ask yourself about this claim or about the person making this claim? What else do we need to know about this before we kind of move forward with this? Or what did this person say that made you trust what they were saying? What kind of credentials do they have? Or like, what kind of research did they talk about behind that claim? Do you feel confident in that research? Should we look it up? Or like, since trying this diet, is your life better or the same or worse? Where has it taken you?
Yeah.
Or, kind of getting them to go a little bit meta, like, okay, well, remember when like the Atkins diet was a big craze? Like, I wonder what happened to that one. Like now it's the paleo diet or the carnivore diet. Like whatever happened to that other one? I wonder if these don't actually work. Otherwise they would stick around.
Yeah.
Sometimes I go for demonizing the food companies because that's something that all of us I think can get behind. And I don't want to always demonize all food companies because they produce great stuff and they do good things, but they also have problems. So I might remind patients that these are profit-driven companies. They do not care about your health. They want everything in your wallet, and they want you to buy what they're selling. In general, it just doesn't work to just tell people they're wrong.
Yeah.
They have to kind of discover for themselves what they're wrong about. Like, how might your bowel movements change if you try this carnivore diet? Would you be concerned about anything related to that?
I hear you in describing this, creating space for guided inquiry. Right? And taking a pause and asking people to just ask a couple questions rather than you swatting down ideas because you know they're wrong.
Yeah, that's the goal. And it does take more time to do it like that, but I think it is more effective.
Yeah.
There's this distinction when you eat food of how it makes you feel when you eat it and how it makes you feel later. And in some ways, that's kind of a perfect metaphor for misinformation as a whole, because sometimes we latch onto a lie because it makes us feel good in the moment, because it answers a burning question, like, why did that plane crash, right? Okay, now I've got a lie that I can latch onto, and now I feel satisfied that I have some knowledge about it. But in the long run, there is harm, just like I might eat something now that makes me feel really good, and down the road, a few hours from now, it makes me feel bad. I think a large part of what you have to do as a nutritionist is to help people see that bigger picture. You talked about sort of patterns of consumption to patterns of eating, helping people see themselves not as just going from one meal to the next or how an individual meal makes them feel, but more long-term, a wider view. What does that conversation look like in terms of getting people to take that longer view?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think most dietitians and nutrition professionals would, that there are really kind of two moments of really how we're going to enjoy our foods. And one of them is when you're actually eating. And then the next bit is afterwards. And both of them really matter, because if we don't have both being positive experiences, then what's going to happen later is the person's going to compensate for that. by trying to enjoy something in a way that is quick because they didn't get real satisfaction they actually needed from the meal before. So I talk to people about really trying to maximize their enjoyment of any given meal or snack, because if you don't feel that in your body, like, okay, I got all these food groups and I had a large volume of food, so the chewing and the time I had to take to eat it, like I felt like I was eating for a while, like I didn't just wolf something down in 2 minutes. And, it's an hour later and I'm still full and I feel like I'm still ready to go. And so aiming for that feeling regularly is the most important thing. And it's all about enjoyment. Enjoyment also happens to come with more food groups in one meal, right? Because you've got different textures, you've got different flavors, you've got maybe different temperatures, even different food groups. More food groups means more nutrition packed into one. So yeah, the more that people can have a pattern of food enjoyment, which is the short-term immediate, like, yeah, this is tasty in front of me, but also I feel good for hours later and I feel like I'm fueled up for hours later, the longer they can sustain whatever dietary pattern that is. And if they don't like it, they're not going to keep doing it. I tell people all the time, you have to like it. This has to be actually positive for you if you are going to keep doing it. So if you're the kind of person who needs to have dessert every day, like plan that in. Plan it. Don't just not ever eat dessert. That's not going to work.
It's like how realistic budgeting advice is like write down the actual budget that supports your life and your dreams and not the aspirational budget that leaves you feeling disappointed and ashamed of yourself every month.
Exactly.
So we've talked a lot about individuals and nutrition and misinformation. I want to take us up a layer of altitude. We started to discuss media a little bit. I'm also then thinking about policy, like governmental policies, and how this kind of ladders up. So we hear individuals who are dealing with or reacting to or interpreting misinformation. How does that misinformation trickle down? Like, who do you see as being kind of the players in that like middle layer and upper layer? What's your interpretation of kind of that framing, that space?
It depends on the specific nutrition misinformation. There's a history to all different myths about nutrition, and I don't know all of them, like where they all came from. But, a lot of it does start with scientific studies that are not necessarily lower quality, but they were done with methods that we don't need to use anymore because now we have better methods, or they were done with data that was imperfect because we didn't have better data. Overall, just because we keep discovering new things in nutrition does not mean that there aren't like principles that we are all kind of agreeing on. Mm-hmm. So there are new discoveries, but it's rare in nutrition for there to be like breakthrough studies because these principles are all kind of agreed upon. So when it comes to policy, the biggest way that nutrition research influences nutrition policy in the US is through the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. This is a committee that's convened every 5 years to create the scientific report that then informs the development of the dietary guidelines for Americans. So the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee submitted their report to the Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy. He has said that the typical Dietary Guidelines for Americans report that then is written out of that is too bloated. And he is considering wanting to advise people to eat more saturated fat, eat more whole fat dairy versus low fat dairy, maybe promote the carnivore diet. He's also mentioned other things like promoting more whole foods, and so that's kind of less of a concern, but I'm not sure how telling people to eat more whole foods without trying to fix the food environment or people's purchasing power would really work well. So this structure really is this committee writes the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee report. They're all experts. They review all of the relevant scientific literature, and it's a huge, huge job. So they write their report. It's 400 pages long. It has a 1,000-page supplement. And then the government comes through and writes their, 150 pages or so of the dietary guidelines for Americans. And then the government also comes and creates websites for the public to come and explore these dietary guidelines. So right now, the current dietary guidelines were published in late 2020, and they came with a website, which is myplate.gov. And this is a consumer-facing website. You can go through and do meal plans. You can pick the number of servings of fruits and vegetables. You can select your sex, your age, your life stage, your body size, your desired calorie, things like that, and you can make meal plans there. So it's an easy-to-use system, and it already exists. So I understand why Secretary Kennedy wants to make nutrition advice more digestible, right? I get that, but it does exist in this myplate.gov for the consumer-facing piece. And the Dietary Guidelines for Americans report is really supposed to be for health professionals and policymakers. So for health professionals and policymakers, they use this in order to inform how programs like the National School Lunch Program, the School Breakfast Program, the Child and Adult Care Food Program, and the WIC program all operate. They also inform food service, institutional food service for the military and for some prisons is guided by the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. And health professionals also use the Dietary Guidelines for Americans as a foundation for nutrition advice, for education to patients. So I hope that we can continue to do this, and I hope that the Dietary Guidelines for Americans are based on the sound science that was reported in the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee report. I hope that that kind of stays being the system, and I would be concerned if it didn't.
Yeah, it sounds like there's this core source of information that is extremely contextual and nuanced and detailed that in relatively recent history has successfully trickled out to policies, to some degree, policies and individuals. And now we're looking at a moment where that information is maybe not being used to inform the policies in the way that we would like.
Right. We'll see what happens. The last I heard, he said that the Dietary Guidelines for Americans were going to be 4 pages long. So there might need to be some more information there. Because right now, the report from 2020, the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, includes information for all different ages and life stages. And it's very helpful for health professionals to have that information.
There's more than 4 food groups.
Yes.
Okay, that's not even 1 page per food group.
Right.
That's very disappointing. This myplate.gov is a phenomenal website. I see this and I'm like, this is exactly what the government should be trying to do, which is, yes, they have to do all that research work, but then make it accessible for people. And as many challenges as we've got with nutrition in this country, it's nice to see stuff like this.
One of the interesting things when I think about MyPlate, I believe it was Michelle Obama who took this on, which took us from the food pyramid to MyPlate.
So Michelle Obama spearheaded the update to the National School Lunch Program and the School Breakfast Program and made both of those programs have healthier foods with more fruits and vegetables for kids.
That's amazing.
And that was huge. That was the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act, which I think was 2009.
Yeah, where we can see this application of this core information you're talking about.
Yes.
It's interesting. The thing I was thinking about is we need to acknowledge that politicians take this content and use it to do things all the time. Some of those things seem more helpful than others, like trying to keep a straight face, because obviously MyPlate is significantly more helpful than a 4-page RFK issued guideline. When I hear someone complaining that something is bloated, that makes me raise an eyebrow because it feels like suppression of information to me.
Right, exactly, because making dietary guidelines for a whole population is very hard. Even though everyone needs all the same nutrients, we all need them in different amounts based on various factors, and there's lots of factors. And not only that, but there's different ways to get nutrients from different food groups, and balancing all that out is really important. So if you're going to advise an entire population on how to eat food-based dietary guidelines, which I think are very helpful, then you definitely want to have a complete picture because you don't want to leave anybody out. That's really important for people to feel like they're represented in those dietary guidelines because, of course, it's very easy to also complain about them. Like, well, I'm a vegetarian, or, well, I hated the food guide pyramid. I'm not going to do this MyPlate thing either. Well, yeah, there's always going to be challenges. I think it's very important in that case for the process to be very transparent. Like, you can see all the citations in the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee report. They're all there supporting their findings. It's a great translation of the science to have myplate.gov there too.
So this segues me really nicely to my next question, which is, if I were a patient in your clinic and I wanted to know the best source for kind of consumer level nutrition information, where would you direct me?
Yeah, that is a great question. So, besides myplate.gov, one of the greatest nutrition minds of our time is Marion Nestle. She's at New York University. She has a new book out very recently called What to Eat Now. It's an update to her book, What to Eat, which was 2006. And it's really going to be perfect for people with or without chronic diseases to figure out what to eat. And she's really a trusted source. She is skeptical of those labels that we talked about on foods and on supplements. One thing that she has said is the more it's telling you that it's healthy for you, the less healthy it is, right?
Yeah.
So another great source is the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which is eatright.org. I don't love the name, but that's the name of the website. They have a new initiative they're doing, which is Nutrition Fact Check. And so they have some good stuff on their website with kind of trending issues. Another source, if you're looking for more like detail on a certain vitamin or mineral or nutrient or diet, Harvard has a website called the Nutrition Source. They've got a ton of detail on all kinds of topics in nutrition, and it's cited and it's all right there. If someone's looking for recipes, then I would recommend the American Diabetes Association, not because everyone has diabetes, but like anyone can benefit from diabetic friendly recipes, and they have a lot of great recipes on that website. They also have free cooking classes, virtual cooking classes.
Very cool.
My assumption is that maybe because of some of these policy changes, you can almost anticipate some of the questions that you're going to get in the clinic. Like, okay, these goofballs are saying X, Y, and Z. So next week in the clinic or a month from now in the clinic, I bet someone's going to come in and ask me about X, Y, and Z. Now, it's possible, given the state of social media and how information works these days, it almost goes the opposite way, which is someone latches on to what they think of as an interesting idea, and that becomes kind of the next big trend in nutrition. And so you can't anticipate that as much. But my question is, what are you anticipating coming down the pipe? Like, what sort of misinformation are you sort of gearing up for, girding yourself for?
I am thinking that people are going to come to me saying that more higher fat animal sourced foods are healthier. And while it's okay to have fat from animal sourced foods, it is something that for a lot of people who are at risk of chronic diseases, you do want to reduce. So I'm going to have to figure out how to talk to people about fat from animal sources, which is mainly saturated fat. I think I'm going to hear a lot about seed oils also, because that is definitely the demon of the oils right now and of fats in general.
They're coming for us, the seed oils.
They're coming
Yeah.
for us. And really, that's a concern too, because a lot of seed oil sources, when used in certain ways, are healthier than fats from animal sources.
Right.
So I'm concerned about fats and the sources of fats a lot. Whole fat dairy in schools is going to be a question too, whether they allow to have whole fat milk in schools. Right now it's low fat or fat free. And that is actually an interesting debate. And I don't think that there's a way to kind of say yes or no, we should have whole fat milk in schools or not. Like, there needs to be a proper study done about it. But I think fat is going to be the thing, and possibly dietary patterns like the carnivore diet too.
If I had to drink full fat milk in school at lunchtime, I would not be able to pay attention in any of my afternoon classes.
Because it would make you sleepy?
It would have a variety of effects.
Oh,
That
yeah.
would make it very difficult
Yes.
for me to concentrate.
See, I grew up on a dairy early days. So when someone puts skim milk in front of me, I just walk away. I don't understand. It's water. Okay, so Amelia, we like to end as much on a high note as we can. What's giving you hope right now?
So when I talk to people, they really are interested in improving their health. A lot of the times they're scared about a new diagnosis, or they're worried about how their kid is doing and whether they're going to get made fun of for being fat at school. And it's like really hard. This is like hard stuff. But then, they are also really interested in trying to change what they eat in order to be healthier. So even if it does take extra time to talk to them about misinformation that they're exposed to, I'm really hopeful for that. And I'm also hopeful because my students are learning about this stuff too. And they're really interested in trying to improve public health in various ways, including through reducing the impact of misinformation and disinformation in the health system. So I think basically my patients and my students make me hopeful.
That's incredible.
Thank you so much, Amelia. This was really great.
This was really great. You guys are awesome.
I was excited to talk to Amelia about nutrition misinformation. And that conversation so far exceeded my expectations. What, Rachel, lens did you draw from that conversation?
My lens is called diet culture.
Oh, that's a good one.
And you may be wondering, how does diet culture translate to any kind of IA lens? So,
Yeah.
this lens asks us to interrogate, how does the system make the user maybe feel better or worse about themselves based on what they're consuming in that digital environment, what they're reading, what they're doing, or what they're acting on, what actions they're taking? How does the system reward, quote, good behavior and penalize, quote, bad behavior? How does the system decide what is good or bad behavior? Who gets to make that decision, and whose worldview is reflected in that framework?
Wait, let me reflect this back to you, make sure I understand.
Okay.
So, diet culture as a thing has sort of built this set of expectations around how we behave, what we eat, what we should look like, all of that kind of stuff. And if we treat that as an analog to a information space, more generally, information spaces could potentially impose a set of expectations on its users, in a sense, creating a sense of shame where none should exist.
Yeah.
Based on users' behaviors and how they understand the information coming out of it and what kinds of expectations it puts on the users. Did I get that?
Yeah, I think that it's like the antithesis of a gamification pursuit. I hate gamification of experiences. I think I can say, yeah. When I think about why I hate it, is because it's so explicitly like trying to get people to do a thing and then make them feel good about doing it. Mm-hmm. And then you have to wonder, okay, what about the opposite though?
Right.
Then you are trying to make people feel bad for not doing the thing.
Right.
And who gets to decide what good or bad is? The thing I really like about this lens, first of all, is that I'm very passionate about trying to call attention to the dangers of diet and wellness culture in other realms of my life. This is a thing I spend a lot of time thinking and reading and talking about. But this is also kind of a mega lens that combines a bunch of things. Like I started with like, is this about disgust? Is this about shame? Is it about incentivization? Like I think a lot of previous lenses we've talked about kind of roll up into this.
Yes.
And when I landed on this kind of diet culture lens, it felt very useful to have this kind of roll up philosophical question of like, why are you trying to make people feel good or bad about the behaviors they're taking? And who decided which behaviors are good or bad? Like whose worldview is that representing? You know, we exist in capitalism. Businesses are going to make decisions about behaviors they want to foster. This lens is about like developing an awareness for that and at least interrogating that idea of like, okay, cool. Whose worldview are we promoting here? And like, are we okay with that?
I'm thinking about this in the context of like an enterprise application. For example, I need to submit expense reports, right? There may be an instinct to make people feel bad for not submitting their expense reports on time. But if we interrogate that and go, wait, why do we want people to feel bad? And can we turn that on its head and instead ask, what can we do to support people in achieving this goal? Can we help people understand why this goal is important? We are looking at the system as a way of providing support and help by being more transparent about what the need is.
Yeah, I love that. I think gamifying the behavior you want is not necessarily harmful, but the absence of not shaming the behavior you don't want,
yeah,
I think is the subtler thing that absolutely happens. It's like paired with it.
Right.
And no one's going into meetings talking about how we're going to make people feel bad because they didn't get the badge. But, you know, that's kind of what you're doing.
Right.
What's your lens, Dan?
Something that I decided to call the lens of making hot dogs.
Please tell me more.
Yeah, I don't eat hot dogs myself, but I understand that the process of making hot dogs is gross. And the thing about a hot dog is that its source material is virtually unrecognizable. And when we were talking to Amelia, we were talking about this kind of core set of dietary guidelines that is created. It's like this big report that comes out every 5 years, and that informs and filters out to other venues, other places where the information in that core document is interpreted appropriate for that venue. So we talked about school lunch guidelines or myplate.gov, right? So the single document ends up informing all of these things. And, it's 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? We can sort of look at myplate.gov and connect it back to this original document. And it got me thinking about how a lot of disinformation is manipulating source material. And part of that manipulation might be that it's so far removed, right? It's kind of gone through a game of telephone, for example, or it's been changed beyond recognition in some way. And so they're simply referencing the source document without really, making use of the source document. So the idea of making hot dogs is really asking, how does the system process original source material? And what role does it play in, let's call it the supply chain of information? Does your system serve as a means for making that original source material as accessible as possible? Does it exist as a way of interpreting the original to be more appropriate for an audience? Or does it end up being as very far removed from that source material?
My mind just went right to LLMs, large language models, when you said that. And I cried a little bit on the inside. Because LLMs are just hot dog machines.
They are just hot dog. I didn't even freaking think about that when I came up with this, but I'm so glad you said it. If there is source material, it's completely unrecognizable. And because of that, because of the way the LLMs work, there's hallucination. So we don't know exactly what they're getting right and what they're getting wrong.
Yeah. When you first started talking about this lens, I immediately started thinking about citation chaining. When you're reading research, if you found an article or whatever that is really touching on some things that you want to dig deeper into, a good thing to do is go down and follow their citations. And then you keep, going deeper and deeper and deeper. And this is citation chaining. Following that breadcrumb trail is such a great way to get source material,
yes.
Primary material for answers. I mean, I'm a huge nerd. I find it deeply satisfying to do that. It's really fun when you discover that stuff. And so I was thinking, how do you bring that joy of citation chaining? If you're a nerd, that spark of joy of tracing knowledge and watching ideas unfold, researcher to researcher. How do you bring that into a system in a more accessible way for more people?
Right.
That kind of act of, connecting back to the root sources and tying this whole web together and seeing how things make sense from primary material. This is a really cool lens.
I think the idea too is, even if it needs to go through a lot of processing, that should be transparent. So even if someone chooses not to be nerdy on that particular day to follow the chain, building their confidence by showing them that such a chain exists, rather than hiding it altogether, I think is a big part of that.
I'm going to tie this back to diet culture again. Processing isn't inherently bad.
Yeah.
There are purposes for processing food and processing information. You just want to be able to trace it.
Right.
I kind of want a hot dog now.
And that was Unchecked. Thanks so much for listening. We really want to hear from you. If you've got ideas for topics or guests or stories, drop us a line at unchecked@curious-squid.com. If you made use of the lenses that we described today in your practice, we want to hear about that too. Hey, check the show notes for any of the links that we talked about today, and it would really mean a lot to us if you shared this episode with a friend and rated and reviewed us on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you.
The day this podcast makes money is the day I cook a turkey.
Oh, Emily, that needs to go in the episode somewhere. Just make that the tag at the very end.